You're old like me to answer work. You really appreciate it. Otherwise, you look like you had an embarrassing accident. So I have poured it all over myself more than once.
You're alive.
Oh, we're alive. Wonderful. Well, right. So, bring us down. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thank you, virtual audience, for watching us. For those of you who are new to the store, we're actually streaming this event out to Facebook and YouTube, and there will be a podcast. So it's actually a big audience. But we appreciate all of you who came down in person to welcome back William Callanan, who we have not seen since his wonderful book about Paris. And you might ask, where is it? And the answer is, it's so wonderful that his publisher's reprinting it because they didn't have any more, which is why we don't have any right here at the moment, right?
Yes, they told me actually we've entered our 5th reprint, so that's really exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But where are they? I don't know.
It's not instant.
It's not instant.
No, plus they have to travel across country because the main warehouse is in Maryland and they don't fly them out here. So it takes a little while.
Publishing is the last old-fashioned business. But it's such a great technology. Like I always tell people, books are such a wonderful invention. Like you can take them to the beach, you can take them to the pool, you can drop them in the pool and they can dry out afterwards. You can get sand in them, no problem. So your Kindle, that's the end of that.
That's very true. Plus there's audio books and digital books. So if you're really desperate, you can read one of those while you're waiting for the print copy, right?
I just actually, the audio book narrator for this book, I'm very excited by Cassandra Campbell, and she's been a narrator for many wonderful books, and I just happen to be lucky enough to get her on this book. And she's another author, so she has, I believe her debut book is coming out in a couple of years too, so I'm excited to be able to work with her, or not work with her, I'm excited that she brought her talents to this book. But it was funny because I had to kind of tell her like what I saw in each character, and there's a director for the audiobook narrator, which I wouldn't thought. Like, I thought you would just pick up the book and start reading. No. It's a whole production. Someone sits down, reads it, then says, cut, let's start again, picks it up. But I will never listen to it. Apologies, Cass. Like, I'm sure it's amazing. But I can't hear those. It's just like, oh.
Right. You know, the whole world of audiobook and podcasts is hilarious because if you're as old as I am, you spent your youth listening to the radio, right? Mm-hmm. You scared yourself with suspense. You listen to the Lux Radio Theater. You listen to Sunday afternoons from like 4 to 8 or 9 or something. We're like this primo time for radio. And now we're back to it again, which I think is wonderful.
I know. It's very strange. I was telling my daughters the other day about Saturday morning cartoons. Mm-hmm. And they were like, why would you do that?
So you have cartoons now.
Right. Yeah. Or just to be able to watch TV and not have it pause and rewind. They were just fascinated by it.
And you know what? It was scarier with the radio, the shadow, Lamar Cranston, you hear the door creaking open and all. It was pretty terrifying. I can remember, you know.
I wonder if they do sound effects in the audiobook. That's really interesting.
Well, they may. And, you know, I think the podcast thing is really interesting because it's now crept in to crime fiction, and many of the sleuths, instead of being the old-fashioned private eye, are now podcasters, particularly true crime podcasters. So it's created a whole new protagonist.
It has. I somehow managed to avoid the word podcast in my book, but when in Rome...
Pretty awesome. You mean the nuns were not doing a podcast?
Actually, the nun who helped me most on this book does have a podcast.
Of course.
So you have to have a podcast now to fit in. So, and I've been on it.
So when we started, you and I together, it was with Paris. So what is it that draws you to do a portrait of a city, and even more interesting, have women as your protagonists?
Those are two really good questions.
Oh,
I didn't think we were going to have stumpers like this. So I don't know. I think I definitely am a writer who starts with place. I look for a place, and then that's where I find my story. I go someplace, and I just kind of look for the stories that kind of emerge from there. So with Paris by the Book, Paris is a place where a lot of people told stories. It's a place where I grew up loving a lot of stories and reading stories to my kids. Either it was Madeline or The Red Balloon was a favorite film and book of mine, and those are located in Paris. And then with Rome, I had a couple different ways that this kind of seed came together. And one of them, my daughter and I was researching this crazy article that never saw print, but I had this great idea to write an article about sending your kid to college in Europe in a country that did not speak English, but at a school that did. So it was a great idea. We looked, and I have some great ideas about the University of the Arctic, if anyone is looking for someone to send undergrad, because it's an amazing program. But we went to Italy, and we didn't really come up with too much. But we stayed one night in this little hotel in Trastevere, and as we were checking in, this nun kind of came out of this little hidden door and then she walked behind us, and then she walked into this other little hidden door, and then no one batted an eye. I said, "What is going on here?" And I said, "Is there a convention?" And they were like, "Oh, this is weird." And they said, "Well, actually, this used to be a huge convent that the nuns lived in, but they've been selling off pieces of it as they get smaller and smaller, and now they've dwindled down to just 2 or 3 of them, and they have their own little corridor, but the rest of the hotel has just been given over to."
Listen, did you read that the Vatican is actually letting some hotel convert? I think it's the Ritz-Carlton, if I'm not mistaken, or the Four Seasons. They're converting one of the Vatican palaces to a hotel, a boutique hotel. So you're not that far from the Sistine Chapel.
No, and that's part of what the seed for the story was. When I saw that this was going on, and it just kind of put me in mind of this character, and the main character of the book is Claire, and she's been a realtor for 30 years. She hates the job, but her job has been to sell off all religious property in the States, mostly churches, convents, repurposing them, giving them new lives. And then these nuns over in Rome decide they need some help selling their crumbling castle, and so they call on the expert for help. So that's suddenly, once I had those little pieces together, the rest of the book started flowing together. As for why I write with these female protagonists, I wasn't sure, but then, well, he's laughing because he knows my family. I have 3 daughters, a beautiful wife, all of whom are really smart, intelligent, and have very strong opinions about everything. And one of the cats is, in fact, a woman, a female, I guess I would say. And so I'm surrounded by strong women. I don't see how I could write any other sort of book. So I'm going to try to write a book with a male perspective soon, but I'm going to have to figure out a way to do it without kind of referencing these women that I have around me all the time.
Maybe the Irish book. We were out drinking before this thing started.
Speaking of Irish
Part of the
books.
reason my voice is sort of funny, but we were running through Ireland, and Liam was talking about Dublin, but I'm making a pitch for Galway and Ashford Castle and the Wild Atlantic Way and so forth, and wolfhounds, because wolfhounds are significant in that part. And you could have a guy, you could even have a male wolfhound, for example.
I could have a male wolfhound. Well, the next book is up for grabs title-wise, so like it could be Scottsdale. All right.
Where you find a strong female protagonist. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Barbara Peters, and I own the Poison Pen. So I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself, because I know some of you are new here. And we were actually running through a gamut of other cities. I was putting in a vote for Budapest. We agreed that Istanbul just won't work right now under present management. And, there's an infinite number of really fascinating places. Probably not Milwaukee.
Well, people always ask, I mean, I live in Milwaukee, why don't I write a book set in Milwaukee? But I feel like I'm too close to it.
Right.
Milwaukee plays cameo roles in both books.
Yeah.
And so there's a little cutaway to
Nick Petrie writes wonderful thrillers
he
set in
does,
Milwaukee.
but he's really from there. And so
Yeah,
in a
he
way,
lives there.
yeah.
That's true.
in a way that I've only lived there 20 years, and so I will always be an expatriate in Milwaukee. So I will really kind of be of the place. My kids
I grew up in Winnetka when it was a day trip till Milwaukee. I still remember that. Now with the freeways, it's like a bedroom community of Chicago if you really want to look at it.
Well, on the train, I think actually it was faster between Milwaukee and Chicago back in the day than it is now. So, probably. But so I don't have a Milwaukee book yet, but there's time. We'll see how the Rome book does. We'll kind of go for the next thing.
So this book has been compared in some ways to Eat, Pray, Love, for those of you who know it about a woman in midlife who has kind of lost her mooring and doesn't know what to do with herself and arrives. And I have to tell you, truthfully, that I grew somewhat impatient with her. I kept wanting to say, grow up, Claire. She's 52 and she's sort of still like a teenager in terms of not getting to grips.
Well, she never got a chance to grow up.
Okay, so this is a 52 Claire who actually is an 18 or 19-year-old Claire.
Because she's 18 or 19 again when her old college flame shows up. She falls in, so she goes over to Rome to help sell this convent. And the nuns say, like, we need some help. And she cases a joint. She said, this place is beautiful. This is a really gorgeous setting. and she's sick of her job. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna stay. I love Rome. I love this building. I think I'm gonna stay. I think I'm gonna stay. And then she said, maybe I'm gonna stay and I'm gonna live the life too. And the nuns are like, oh, I don't know about that. But she's really convinced that she's going to. And then her old college flame shows up, and suddenly she has to decide between these two paths. And she goes back and forth a lot. But I think it's because she never really worked those things out back in the day.
Why didn't she work those things out back in the day?
Well, I don't think she was able to. She had a child. She had a daughter, Dorothy, just out of college when she was 21. And so she was immediately involved in raising Dorothy, finding a way to support her. And she did all that without the father and also without a man in her life. And she's like, why do I need anything more? Like, so when the old college flame shows up, it's not like I had this, the last time I was on television, I was last week actually on the WTMJ morning show in Milwaukee, which is the NBC kind of following on Today Show affiliate. And so I was telling the morning show host, I said, so she has to choose between her old college flame and life as a nun. And the host was like, well, that's not hard. I was like, no, it is. Like, she's gotten 30 years perfectly fine without the man in her life. So why doesn't she just join the women community and peaceful, have this wonderful meals all the time, and enjoy some kind of spiritual meaning for herself? And so I was not able to convince the morning show host to take up the habit. But nevertheless, I was able to convince her that maybe there are different paths you could take. Because I think the book, more than becoming a nun, is about starting over. And like everyone giving, like I just saw in the wake of the pandemic, people were really interested in kind of starting over and starting lives with more meaning, not necessarily in the convent, but just trying to figure out ways they can do things in such a way that really kind of pay off for them in less, and not just purely monetary form.
Right, plus 50 is the new 30, or in my case, 80 is the new 50.
Yes.
Yeah, very hard, right.
Exactly.
But you have sort of skipped over the question of why was she a single mom?
Well, because the father of Dorothy wasn't worth, as my grandmother would say, the powder to blow into blazes. So
So he was good for sex, but not for the long haul.
I didn't ask Claire about that. Because I think it was just
Presumably,
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, or she was drunk, whichever way you want to
it
look
was
at
just a one-night stand in that case. And so he was out of her life, and she dated other men along the way, but she had a much more strong relationship with her best friend from college, who really set her up with a job, was a support network. And then, as she says, I think Claire says at one point, she also kind of figured out other people pitied her as a single mom, and she said, I don't know how you do it, two-parent families, because there's too many people to hug. And she's like, when it's just me and Dorothy, it's just the two of us, and we form a bond and a unit. And so I think she really prided herself on being an independent woman, independent parent, someone who kind of found her own way. So even though she dated along the way, she never really wanted to settle down with anyone. Perhaps because she was thinking someday she would get back with that college flame. But when he shows up and kind of makes that possibility a reality, she's suddenly thrown in like, wow, I may actually have to do something about this. And then she has to deliberate for a while.
So it's finding a new track, so to speak.
Yes, it is. It is. And she's not so sure about the track itself because she loves Rome, but Rome is also really frustrating. She doesn't speak the language. It's a kind of a chaotic city in a lot of ways. It's kind of messy and dirty. It's beautiful, but it's all these different things at once. And that's a real challenge for her as she tries to kind of figure out, navigate the city and how she feels about it along the way.
So, I mean, there are religious institutions, convents all over the world that are losing people dedicated to the religious life. I hadn't thought about the role of real estate in it, but the role of real estate in it is significant in point of fact. It wouldn't be true just in Rome. I mean, if you're talking about Ireland, everywhere you go in Ireland, there are churches standing empty, being converted to, concert halls or theaters
Absolutely.
or just real estate. I mean, you and I both read the Mansion, presumably,
Yeah.
the Wall Street Journal,
yeah.
me mostly to grind my teeth. But, there's, at least once a month, there's a church that's featured as being converted to some kind of, home.
Yes. Claire has a whole riff on what it's like to convert churches into homes and what sort of person puts their bed on the altar as opposed to the kitchen, and where you might find the water and the plumbing in a church and things like that. And I think it's interesting, but like one thing I didn't want to tell with this book was like a journey of like despair and dismay and decline, because the nuns, I had quite a few nuns. I corresponded and interviewed a lot of nuns about the book, and the story that was told. And one thing they were telling me is like, just don't go for the cliche like everything's falling apart. There's some of us who are still here, still fighting the good fight, and we may not be in that big old drafty castle, but that's because we don't need the castle anymore. So let's sell it off. So that was something I discovered along the way.
Well, but you do, your nuns demand a quorum, so to speak. There has
Yes.
to be X number of nuns to make a decision,
Yes.
and they're one short,
They're one
which is some pressure on Claire.
It's a lot of pressure on Claire because they had a prospect back in Brooklyn, or the Bronx actually, I think is.
Right. Was that Anna? Is that
Yes.
Right.
And, she doesn't come back, and then Claire's like, well, I could solve all their problems just by being this one person. But she needs to be more than that, and the nuns don't want her to do it for the wrong reasons. And
Plus, it's not an instant process. I mean, it's not like you just hold up your hand and suddenly become a nun.
No.
Generally, it's a fairly long novitiate.
yeah, at least 7 years before you take your first crack at it.
Right.
So she has to spend this whole idea of like whether or not she's going to do it, and then if she does do it, what terms, and then you have to give up all your money. You have to take a vow of poverty. So you have to give away everything, not just like your money, but like everything, like everything in your closet, all of your books, all of like the whole idea of like you just show up with like a little bag, which I think is really powerful. One of the other inspirations for this book comes from a family member of mine whose name was Morris Shine. He was born in 1900 in Chicago. So old Chicago Irish, which is where my family's all. When they ask what county in Ireland I'm from, I usually say Cook County because that's Cook County, Illinois, is where they all are from. And he was a wild man. He was a playboy in Chicago, and he would have a fancy car and fast living. And every year he would go down to the Kentucky Derby, and then he would kind of drink and bet to excess, and then he would go to a Trappist monastery nearby where Thomas Merton actually later was a monk.
Oh, right.
And he would atone, and then he would go back to Chicago and come back down the next year for the Derby and do it all over again. So one year he suddenly decided he'd had enough of all this, and he told the abbot, like, I'm going to join. And the abbot's like, I doubt you are, but he said, no, you watch. And the abbot said, well, I'm going to put your car up on blocks because I don't really believe that this is going to happen. And a year passed, and my uncle was still there. And so they sold the car, and he stayed there until he was 98 years old. When he died at 98, he was the oldest Trappist monk in the world. He'd never left that building.
Wow.
So he was looking for a change in his life. And I think the idea that people were kind of making these wholesale changes in the middle of, like, who knows what's going on inside them and what might be kind of calling them to a different kind of end or different. And also, they take a vow of silence. So that's a whole different prospect.
Yeah, but not every cloister community has a vow of silence
No,
at all.
no. And in fact, the community in this book doesn't at all.
Yeah.
So they're a teaching order. They're kind of active. They get around town a lot. So there's all different kinds of ways to do it, which Claire explores and experiences. But she also explores Rome. She loves Rome. This book. I used to say the book. I've read a couple of reviews that say this book should come with a warning. You're going to want to book a ticket to Rome after reading it. And I said, well, that shouldn't be a warning.
Right.
No longer on Alitalia, sadly. But,
No longer now, I'll tell you.
Right.
But yes, I'm all for booking a trip to Rome with this.
It's a wonderful city. I mean, I've been there several times, and I love the way you can cut down. What is the church where you can go all the way down to the Roman ruins?
St. Clement.
Yeah, exactly. And is there a Mithraic temple at the bottom?
Yes.
Right, which is a Roman religion dedicated to the bull. It was a religion really of soldiers in Rome, and they had the Mithraeum is what it was called.
It was a
bull
rough
worship.
religion. I mean,
Yeah.
so there was devoted to the worship of bulls, and so they would slaughter a bull, and then you would sit in this room and basically have a blood shower as they kind of sacrificed the bull. So,
Right, but it was very secretive.
Yeah, well, it was very low on the ground, and I can see why it didn't catch on. But
well, no, it's true. Got on with some, but then they kept building on top of
they
it.
kept building, so you can still go to this church in Rome today.
Right.
You can go down to the
That's
Mithraic Temple, which has got these kind of stone beds, and then
Mm-hmm.
the church just built like their own church on top of it.
Oh, there's a medieval church, and then there's a modern church.
And
The only equivalent I know of that is there's a place in Bath, England, and I'm trying to, Sally Lunn, trying to remember, is it a Lund cake? Sally, whatever it is. Anyway, famous for whatever this pastry is. And when you go there, there's the Roman ruins, and then there's the Tudor kitchen, and then there's the 18th century kitchen, And then there's the modern kitchen. It's really fascinating to see the kind of vertical cut through time.
Which is happening all the time in Rome. I was very struck whenever I walk around there that you can see everything
Right.
from the 21st century to the first, just being like kicking a rock on the street. You never know what's going to be.
Well, it's not just Rome. There's much of Italy like
Mhm.
that, if you look at it. But anyway, it's a fascinating city. So part of the reason you write the book is to explore Rome, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. People said like you're just writing these books to go around the world, and I said yeah.
Tax-free travel for authors. No, tax deductible.
Tax deductible, definitely
Right.
not tax free.
No, sorry, got away from me there.
Yeah, I know that would be wrong. We'll tell them. I would never do that.
You know, it said eat, pray, love, but I think this reminds me more of Under a Tuscan Sun, the Frances May's books. It's not set in Rome. Of course, neither is Eat, Pray, Love. But, she's another person whose life needs rebooting. And she heads off to Italy where she runs into all sorts of the same issues while she's trying to figure out a new life.
Right, and
It's a good movie, too. If you haven't seen it, I can recommend it. I don't remember what channel it plays on.
I think we need to make this into a movie. This book, maybe we could start that tonight. Someone watching is going to buy this book for the movies. We'll say that it started here.
It would even be interesting as sort of serial television. We could do Paris, then we could do Rome.
Yeah.
Carry on.
And we could just
Season 1, Paris. Rome. We started watching, I'm making a total aside here, Ted Lasso. I read about it in the New York Times yesterday, and I thought, how did I miss Ted Lasso? I mean, and it slips right by because it's like 30-minute segments that, like binge watch for of them right off the top. But there's another person.
right.
This is not totally apropos, who winds up in a completely foreign environment, the football environment, the whole bit. But when his son comes, you can see how far he's adapted in a short time because he already is familiar with, changes in food, changes in terminology. There's a very funny, I love the pun about the boots. I can't remember how it goes, but there's a really hilarious, because that's the trunk of a car in England is a boot, and there's,
And the shoes are boots.
right, and the shoes are boots, and but it's really very, very clever.
And he's going to Europe to start over as well. But I'm not setting a book in London. I've just decided.
He didn't go, well, he did sort of go to see, he went to create some space. But
Yes.
yeah, you're right. I'm only at episode 4, so I don't want to go any farther.
I just
But anyway, I can see where you could, we could carry this on. We could hit Ireland next,
absolutely. We'll
maybe
just
go
work
to
our way-
Hungary.
Hungary. We'll just work our way through some signs. I know the story has to be there, so we'll have to see kind of
Well,
what
it's hard to miss stories in Ireland.
it is. Everyone's got a story.
And you could sort of stay away from the Maudlin Laundry and some of the really awful stories about Ireland and do something more.
Well, that's what I was trying to do with this book, to kind of tell a different sort of story set in Rome, what people don't hear about as much as other stories, and just kind of give them a chance to explore. There's an Arizona connection too, I realized. Like, we talk about the different, this one's a little bit more distant, but bear with me. So, like, the different seeds for this novel, I had those nuns who were crossing the lobby, and then I had my uncle who went to the Abbey in Gethsemane. And then I've been working for a long time on this nonfiction project, which I was talking about earlier today, which is about the first guy to fly to Hawaii, whose name is Lester Maitland. And he flew at the same time that Lindbergh flew to France. And
You mean he piloted the plane as opposed to being a passenger?
yes, he piloted
Okay.
the plane. And they were equally famous at the time. They were both invited to the White House, and they both had big ticker tape parades, but no one remembers Lester Maitland. And Hawaii is a much smaller target than France, so in some ways it's a bigger achievement to fly that direction. But he had a very interesting
Plus the wind's against you.
Right.
Going to France, the wind is behind you. So
Who
it's
couldn't
actually
fly to
easier.
France?
Just as a veteran of flying
Right.
both directions, I thought I'd mention that, right?
But at age 50, after he never kind of got that fame. He certainly didn't follow Lindbergh's route, metaphorically. And so at age 50, he walked into a church in Michigan one day and said, "I want to become an Episcopal priest." And they let him, and he flew to tiny parishes for the rest of his life. And one of his parishes was Cave Creek, Arizona.
Wow.
And
A
so there's-
flying father.
Flying Father. So the Episcopal Church in Cave Creek, Arizona has a portrait. I think their social hall is named for Maitland. And so this idea that someone could, at age 50, kind of decide to do something completely new with some of a spiritual direction, that also filtered into this book. So there's a certain, like a little bit of Arizona. Maybe that's why the orange is in there to kind of connect.
So let me tell you what, in the DMV in Arizona, once you get to be 70, you have to go in every 5 years to get a driver's license. So in my past appearances, now 1, 2, 3, they ask me every time when we're done if I'd like to get a pilot's license because my eyesight is so great,
Nice.
which I attribute to spectacular cataract surgery and telescoping lenses. It isn't that, I mean, Arizona's the place you really want to have eye surgery if you, and most of us do at some point. But I love that. And every time I'm just right on the cusp of saying yes. And then I think I would have to,
Speaking as a civilian, I'm a little nervous they're giving out pilot's license to people who don't know how to fly. But
I think that it's a prerequisite for learning how to fly. That they would have to approve me. But I think it's so funny, when I get all through and they say, and would you like to apply for a pilot's license? No, not yet.
come for it next time. We were talking about flying earlier today. I think you should.
We
do
were. My brother had one, and for my 50th birthday, the neatest thing, he flew me over the Grand Canyon. He had this little plane, and we flew up, and then we flew the whole canyon up and back, which was remarkable. It's the only way you can actually see the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Because when you're in it, it's totally different, or on the edge, whether it's the North Rim or the South Rim, you can only see so much. But flying over, it's amazing. And you're too high in commercial flights.
Right.
You have to be. And I can't remember whether they even let you do that anymore, because there were a couple of crashes that were pretty ugly.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely clear that you can fly over the canyon, at least at a low altitude at this point.
It's going to be tough to type up a summary of this show. Because we've covered a lot of
Do you know, we once had an author here. It was so funny. We had a big room, and he and I were talking. If you're talking particularly about crime fiction, you can only talk for maybe 10 minutes about the plot, right? Because otherwise,
You give it away.
you're just all spoilers. So, we talk about other stuff. Anyway, this woman who was new, after we'd done our thing, we're talking, she was really irate, and she raised up her hand. She said, I came to hear the author talk about the book. She was drowned out by other people who stood up and said, no. They said, we come for the digression. We can read the book.
You can always tell a writer, because writers love digressing, because that's
Right.
where the stories are. You kind of wander off the story. Like, here I am talking about Hawaii all of a sudden. And Lester
Listen,
made me find it.
these people came out on a potentially rainy Monday night to spend, they deserve an hour of entertainment. And that's what we're providing by doing all these. You guys are used to it. You're getting your own pictures. And it's fun because you never do know quite where it's going. But I think having an author just read to you is really not that entertaining. The only time Ed McBain was ever here, bless his heart, he had throat cancer, which he died of. And he found it really difficult to talk. So he just read from one of his 87th precinct books. And that, and so he was like this the entire time. And everybody was here. All you could see was the top of his head and his kind of gravelly voice. And afterward, people, they were so disappointed. And I thought right then, we're not going to do that. I mean, it's fine if you want to read a paragraph or a page or something, but to sit here for a whole hour while somebody's reading from their book is not that entertaining.
No, and not even for the author. Or especially not for the author. It's like, whenever I read from my book now, I just want to bring a pen. Edit things along the way. It's like, that line. No. So you kind of go through it. But when I first started doing this, which was 20 years ago, I think, you were there at the ground floor. I know I've broken into this audience of like total strangers, which is great. But otherwise, I know many people at each of my readings. So, but 20 years ago, I would read a lot. At a reading, like I would read for maybe 20 minutes.
They were actually called readings. Was part of it.
Yeah, and it was like 20 or 30 minutes, and now I read maybe a page if I do that.
Would you like to read a page?
I could, but I'm not sure. But we were just talking about how authors are not.
I didn't mean to intimidate you.
Well, we'll see how I feel about it. Maybe, all right, I'll read a page. Let's see.
All right.
But we'll have to kind of digress while I'm picking out a page.
Select a page. Okay. So, if any of you are new to the store tonight, I'll digress. You're welcome to sign up for our nifty newsletter, which I will tell you because we do this sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Usually only one live event, but oftentimes They have a virtual event or even two virtual events and a live event. Virtual events have really sort of transformed the way that we get to interact with authors and books. I was very pleased with the Tucson Left Coast Prime that I went to last weekend. How many people that I've never seen before came up and talked to me about how wonderful it was to watch all the authors on the virtual events and how it had helped them get through the pandemic, or some of them found an author new to them, and then they could go find a video of it because they stay there forever. And I thought that was so neat, that technology came along just when we needed it at the start of the pandemic. Because we've been streaming since 1995, but nothing was as good as Zoom. All right, you found a page?
I think I found a page.
All right.
So there's a lot of characters mentioned, but I'm going to try and sub them out and so we won't do it. So I won't mention them all. But let me just see how this works. So one night, Claire, it's early on her trip to Rome, and she's wandering around. She's not in the convent yet. She's still trying to figure out what she's going to do in Rome, whether she should go home. And she gets inspired to go see some outdoor opera. And she goes and sits down. Yes.
She does go to the
She
Bath
does.
Caracalla.
She does go to the...
So can I interrupt and tell you? My first time in Rome, when I was 15 years old, we indeed went to the Baths of Caracalla to see, surprise, Aida, where they had actual elephants and camels and stuff, and Radames came charging onto the stage in a chariot because he has this incredible opening aria with this wonderful, but they sold at that time in Rome glass tubes for the it's like popcorn at movie theaters. They were glass tubes, which I thought in my innocence were probably like Coca-Cola. I was so drunk by that I hardly remember how it all turned out. Anyway, it's an incredible venue for staging opera in particular. And Aida, at the stage of the Metropolitan Opera, where I have seen it since several times. I didn't know how they all come out at the end. And you can't actually have live elephants and camels and stuff, but by God, you can in Rome at the baths.
Absolutely. And it's just to be in that setting, to be in that history surrounded by all of it.
And the acoustics are
And the
great.
acoustics are great. And I think the acoustics of history are great too. If I can't stretch that a little bit farther, just knowing that you're hearing where people have heard that story so many times before, and seen it and witnessed it. Now I don't even want to read this because I feel
I preempted you, I'm sorry.
no, but I feel like we've covered the material. Well, here, I'll read it anyway, just
Okay.
for fun. So so Claire sits down, and she's going to mention they found a key. Well, all right, which actually we just saw the cover of the Italian edition, which is coming out, which I was so impressed that the Italians are making a book of it. Because I would have thought Italians would not think an American knew anything about Italy. Maybe they're publishing it just to make fun of me, but but the title of their book is not When in Rome, because When in Rome doesn't really translate into Italian, but is The Key of Joy.
Really?
Yeah, and it's got a completely different cover of someone looking longingly at Hadrian's tomb, which I don't think a lot of people do that. So we're actually asking, could we get a new cover? Okay. Let's see if that haunts them.
Longingly at Hadrian's tomb?
Yes.
Longingly.
Exactly.
Not the adverb I would choose.
No, it's not, and it's not the cover I would choose. So we're waiting to figure out who's coming. All right. So
Ciao.
there goes my deal. Oh man. Should I read this? Or should I keep
It's
stopping?
been good for at least 5
I
minutes.
know we're just eating clock here. It's March Madness. I'm learning how to kind of get to the end of the game. An empty seat sat next to hers, and she couldn't help think of her latest ex, Byron, who had been anti-dancing, so she dropped him, but he was also a serious opera fan. He was too serious and about everything, but Claire had liked this about him, in any opera, the moment when the concertmaster tuned the orchestra. The sound swelled, silenced, and Byron would lean just the slightest bit forward. He was gone, though, and she was alone with an empty chair. May I join you, Mother St. Luke would have said. Mother St. Luke is the ghost of the convent. And Claire would have, a brief vision passed through Claire. 2 nuns at the opera, one of them old, one of them Claire. She shook her head, opened a program. Her mind had done this to her before. Certain cities, certain jobs, certain women religious led her to daydream, conflate her past and future. Prickly Sister Georgia had stopped Claire as she left tonight. Claire had briefly gone speechless, worried the old sister would try to recruit her that very moment, worried that part of Claire wanted to be found so worthy, but no. Sister Georgia had taken Claire's hand in hers and pressed a small key into it. For the door? No. Mother St. Luke's emergency key. Claire had meekly protested. Sister Georgia had shaken her head. She clasped Claire's hands around it. Help us find what it opens. Claire had said she would, and the woman had held on and stared at Claire. The moment had felt like the moment now as the orchestra fell silent. The feeling of Mother St. Luke, the ghost sitting next to her, became so vivid she almost turned to look. Claire didn't. She didn't give in. Never had, not since. The conductor raised her hands, and Claire clasped her own, remembered the sharp teeth of the key, the stair. Everything was about to start. So I think we'll just keep going. It's only page 42. It's only 316 pages in the book. I could probably cover it.
Talk to us about the key.
The key is, so they find there's a key that is, this is actually, now this is going to be so tricky to talk about the key. There's a key in the book which floats around. The old nun, this is an interesting story. This is not quite a digression, but it's a productive digression. So Mother St. Luke is long gone by the time all of her digressions have been productive, but this one, this is mine. Mother St. Luke is dead and gone by the time Claire gets to Rome, but she's left behind this key, and she had a very interesting past. She was the au pair on the set of Roman Holiday back in the day. And the director's daughter, actually, and this is true from the biography, the director's daughter was kidnapped briefly by a man on a bicycle coming home from the American school one day, and disappeared for several hours, and then somehow was safely returned. And it's a very mysterious incident. And in the book, I invented this fictional happening where Mother St. Luke, who was not a nun then, was the au pair, and she feels very guilty about it. And so she kind of goes and spends the rest of her life atoning. But she has this key, which everyone's trying to figure out what the key goes to. And so they spend much of the book trying to figure out if the key opens up a storage locker at the train station, or if it opens up a hidden door in the convent, or if it opens up something around town. And so they keep looking for it. So, and apparently in the Italian edition, it unlocks joy, because the Italian is called the key to joy, which would not have been my choice, but it's something that they look for all around. And it was one of the things that I discovered as I was doing, looking at old maps of the neighborhood, where I picked a place to put the convent, a fictional place, a real place to put a fictional convent. And then I realized, looking at this old map, something very unusual was mapped there. And I really want to tell you what it was.
No.
It's where the flying saucers land. Oh, no, it's not a flying saucer. But there's an actual, what the key unlocks is this actual historical thing. I'm really getting close now.
Don't do that.
Okay.
Right.
But
The
it's
key
actually,
generally opens a portal.
yes.
Okay.
And there's actually a real portal.
Yeah. And that's the great thing about Rome, is you can find, hidden portals all over the place.
It was part of, like, one of the funny things about this book was we went in 2021, right as the curfew was lifted, and we were the only Americans in Rome, my wife, my daughter, and I. And we went exploring, and I committed myself to do everything in Rome that my character does. And my character does some pretty crazy things. Like at one point she winds up in the hospital. So I went to the hospital where Muriel Spark used to spend.
The ospedale.
Yeah. And up the hill.
Right.
And it was kind of a celebrity laying in hospital. And so I did that once, and I just kind of wandered around the hospital until someone kicked me out. And then I said I need a COVID test. I said, oh, why didn't you say so? So you can spend all. So then I got to wander around even more. And then Claire also goes running outside St. Peter's in the middle of the night. So one night in the middle of the night, I went over to St. Peter's Square, and I said, are the police going to let me do this? And they weren't sure either. But they were like, oh, crazy American. That is exactly what he did. So I went running around the technology. And then they had this weird thing right in front of St. Peter's, the door of the church. There was this kind of weird, like, state-of-the-art 1978 security technology, which was like a green laser beam.
All right.
It was going along the ground. And I thought, this is really not doing it. And so the next day I met with a bishop from the Vatican to do some interviewing, and I said, and I found out the secret green laser beam. He's like, that doesn't exist. I was like, I knew it. It's really something. So I did that, and I went to like these kind of different diving neighborhoods, and went in the basement of a lot of places. And I didn't go to a lot of sightseeing because Claire doesn't necessarily do that.
Did you go down to the port? Did you go down to Ostia?
I did. Yeah.
That's the one thing I haven't done that I really regret.
Oh, it's wonderful. We went. They have a series of beach clubs on the beach, and we went right next to the Italian president has a little kind of beachfront estate, and then all these other people have little beach clubs which you can pay to go in. And then they have, the funny thing is at lunchtime, so it's like a paid club, and they have a pool and then a beach with umbrellas. It's all very normal. But then for lunchtime, everything stops. So I was like, great, we'll go get some like chicken tenders and fries. No. Plated meal, pasta, well, 3 courses. People dressed.
I mean, it's on,
Cloth
come on, it's
napkins.
not on the Aegean, so, no, it isn't, actually, it's on the other side. It's on the Mediterranean.
Yeah, but the
The Aegean's on the eastern side of, yeah, so.
and so everyone stopped to have this really formal meal, and we kind of felt left out because we just wanted fries and chicken. And then they also made us wear bathing caps, because I'm not sure they just wanted to laugh at us because we were Americans, but they said that was a rule. So yes, we've been down to Ostia. And have you been to the old city?
Mhm.
The old city, the Ostia Antica, which is kind of where that's really incredible to see. So
There's rooms all over Italy, right? Perugia was actually my favorite.
Oh, really? I haven't been.
I love Perugia. The Etruscans preceded the Romans, so it's really very
I could have called the book When in Perugia, but it doesn't quite.
Carol in Perugia. Why don't we stop digressing and ask the customers here if they would like to ask questions?
Okay.
How's that
That'd be
for our
great.
digression? Questions from any of you? Come on, don't be self-conscious. No. No. What? Rich.
That was the ghost that story. In the
Well, we've left them speechless. So we've already mentioned that you haven't yet fastened upon your next city, although we kicked Ireland around a bit.
we have.
Anybody want to make recommendations for what city that Liam should stage his next story in? Possibly with a man? Because of the decking.
There's a man. I do inhabit a male point of view for various passages in this book, so it's not
True.
complete.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
So anyway, suggestions? Any place you'd like to see?
Santiago.
Oh, that would be good.
Which one? The one in Spain or the one in Chile?
Chile.
Actually, the one in Spain's pretty cool.
We could do Santiago to Santiago.
There you go. You just named the book. You just named the book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of water.
I'll get them a canoe or something.
Oh,
really? I wanted to do that.
It's more interesting to go to Rocamadour in France, and then that's because that's where one of the Camino starts.
I think is it Timothy Egan, who's the author who wrote about doing the Canterbury pilgrimage, where he actually walked all the way from Canterbury to Rome, or maybe.
He couldn't have walked from Canterbury to Rome,
Well, I think he took a boat for part of it.
right? Or he swam, but
Or he swam.
nonetheless, right? Yeah, my friend Jason Goodwin actually did that from England, from London to Istanbul.
Really?
But, yeah, he wrote a book about it, which is truly fabulous. And then he wrote some great mysteries. The Janissary Tree won the Edgar, as a matter of fact.
And then the Patrick Kermer books are
Mhm.
that's Greece then mostly because he walked. That was a good long
Yeah.
walk.
It was easier to walk then.
It was easy to walk.
And people were nicer. I mean, when you got there, they let you sleep in a barn, or
Right.
there wasn't like a Motel 6 or an Airbnb where you were forced to check in.
No, it's much different now. I mean, part of the convent rule, like the reason they like Clarion is because the rule is like the rule of Saint Benedict, which is if someone shows up at your door, you have to take them in.
Right.
But you have to keep them there. So that's and that's why the ghost is trying to get rid of us. Does it matter which one fell? Because I wonder if that's the next book that I should write.
How long?
Yeah, but
How long
that's-
were you guys there when you and your daughter?
We've been, when my daughter and I went, we were only there for 2 weeks.
Okay.
A little over 2 weeks.
Okay.
But I've been there multiple times in the past. But we got to do a lot of different things. She did a lot of sketching.
Okay.
She was my She was my note taker. Although she pointed out she did the introduction in Milwaukee, and she read the notes that she took, and there was like 50 words, and then that was it for 10 days.
Huh.
When at the end I said, "Sweetie, can I see your notes?" And she said, "Here they are." And that's all we had. So I was like, "Oh dear, that isn't so great." But she was great because she had a real eye for fashion, and so Claire kind of admires what the women around town are wearing, and I didn't. I was not seeing the things that she saw, so she told me how to describe the different pants, the look, and all this other kind of stuff.
And shoes.
And shoes.
Shoes.
Oh,
Shoes are a
shoes.
huge thing if you're, you know,
There's a big.
Ferragamo, all that good stuff.
They were very fascinated by there's a special heel or kind of a chunky heel that you wear across the cobblestone so you don't break your ankle. And then I had another Roman reader. I had a whole art. The acknowledgement section for this book is almost as long as the book itself. Did so many different readers and researchers, and one of the Italian women told me, well, you can walk on cobblestones with stiletto heels, but you
Very
just have to be very carefully.
Very carefully.
Mhm. So I did not try that.
No cross dressing for you and Ron?
No, not that we're going to reveal on this show.
Great. Well, I think we probably exhausted what we have to do there. So thank you. It's been fun as always to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciated talking about women run.
Loved it. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, virtual audience. If you'd like to get your book signed, probably best to Liam